This is the next video in the series where we'll be testing and ranking every single perk in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This video will focus on the agility perks, which happen to be the best of the main stats so far. I've cataloged every single perk into a database which can be accessed via the link in the description if you're interested. I've put timestamps to help you skip around, and let's jump right into the testing. Up first, level 6 Deft Hands. This perk reduces the agility requirement for all weapons by 2. Instead of this sword requiring 17 agility to use, it reduces down to 15. The agility determines how much stamina is used up per swing, so for the testing we'll use one weapon we have enough agility for and one we do not. With the battle longsword, we can get off just over 5 attacks before exhausting all of our stamina, and only 4 attacks with the saber. By taking the perk, we increase the number of attacks by 1 for both the longsword and the saber. While one attack might not seem like a lot, it represents an increase of 20 to 25% for these weapons. This is a great perk to take early on. Next, we're testing level 6 Featherweight, which reduces fall damage by 30%. I found a lovely waterfall in the Trotsky region that's high enough to do a ton of damage, but not enough to kill. The first fall is brutal, breaking both legs, and took 88 fall damage in total. After a reload, we repeat and get much better results. It's still a lot of damage, but we stay on our feet and only take 45 damage, or roughly half. The perk states it reduces fall damage by 30%, but based on the math, it's closer to 50. I also wanted to test the more likely scenario of riding off a cliff on horseback to see if the perk helps here. On the first test, Pebble sticks the landing, but we took 90 fall damage, which is higher than when on foot. We repeat the test with the perk and only take 53 damage this time, or a little more than 40% reduction. It's interesting to see the fall damage while mounted be higher than on foot, but at least we can prove the perk is working better than described. Moving on to the level 8 perks, we start with Dominant Hand, which boosts combat with a one-handed weapon while not using a shield. It reduces the stamina cost per attack by 20% and decreases the stamina cost per block. To test, we use a short sword with no shield and attack with and without the perk. Without the perk, we can get off 6 attacks, and with the perk up to 7, or an increase of around 17%. I also tested blocking, but it was much less conclusive. It does seem to use less stamina for some of the blocks, but regular blocks are not the way to succeed in this game. You can't stop combos with this way, and it chews through your stamina quickly, perk or not. This is a great perk for one-handed weapon users, but mostly for the attack stamina. Up next, level 8 Nimble Stance. This perk reduces dodge stamina cost by 40%. We start the test by pissing off the guard and dodging all of his attacks. I tested all 4 directions, and they seem to use the same amount of stamina. Then I took the perk and tested it again, and the difference is massive. Typically, dodging takes up so much of your stamina in the early game that there isn't much left for offense, but with this perk, you'll be flying around with plenty of stamina to spare. This is a very good perk. For level 10 perks, we start with Ranger Run. This perk increases our stamina recovery by a massive amount after we run for 10 seconds. I actually misunderstood what this perk did before, but we're starting the testing by picking an easy spot to run in a straight line from. We sprint until our stamina runs out and repeat the test with the perk. We can see the pop-up in the top right after running for 10 seconds, but also see it disappear after touching a bush, which happens several times. This blocks us from sprinting. We didn't really get much further with the perk, but what I did notice was how insanely fast our stamina recovers when we stop running. Here's the two side by side. It's a big difference. So the strategy with this perk is to run to activate it, then take advantage of the stamina recovery to turn and fight. While I still think this is a good perk, I wouldn't rate it as highly as I did before. The other level 10 perk is Deft Hands 2, which increases the previous agility reduction bonus from 2 up to 5. We already covered this, so we won't spend too much time here, but let's at least see what the difference the extra 3 agility has. In our previous test, we got 5 attacks with the longsword and 4 attacks with the saber. With the level 1 perk activated, that increased by 1 to 6 and 5. And finally, with the level 2 perk, it goes up by 1 again to 7 and 6 respectively. Once again, the gains aren't linear, but they are still meaningful, and this is a great perk to have. Up next, level 12 perk Totentanz. After we perform a perfect dodge, we get an attack bonus of 15% for 5 seconds. A perfect dodge is defined as a dodge done within the same time frame that a perfect block would be done in. For testing, we use the same guard and dodge his attack. The pop-up shows up right away, the perk shows up on the buffs page, and we can see our sword's damage increase significantly, going up by 19, 19, and 3 respectively, or about 15 to 16%. Oddly enough, it increases our attack damage for ranged weapons as well, but without the ability to dodge with a ranged weapon in hand, it's basically useless. This is an amazing perk and might be one of the strongest, especially when paired with the other dodge buff Nimble stance. Up next at level 12 we have Creeping Phantom 1, which increases our sneak speed by 15%. We start the testing by using the same ranger run spot and time how long it takes us to get to the edge of the grocer's house. Crouching without the perk took 20 seconds to complete the run, and with the perk it took only 15 seconds. If my math is correct, 5 seconds faster to complete a 20-second course is 25% faster movement speed, and not 15%. I'm a huge fan of math mistakes when they fall in our favor, and this is a great perk to take. First up for level 14 we have Finesse, which increases the slash damage of all melee weapons by 5%. We can verify this by looking at our two weapons, a short sword and an axe. Without the perk, they do 130 and 96 damage respectively, and with the perk, these numbers jump up slightly to 136 and 101. The perk definitely works, and it's as stingy as it sounds. It's not a bad perk, but for 5% at level 14, it's also not the top priority. The other level 14 perk is Viper, and it increases the pierce damage for all melee weapons by 5%. I've equipped a short sword and a ranged weapon just to see if they made a mistake. Without the perk, our two weapons do 123 and 119 pierce damage. With the perk, our short sword jumps up by 6 damage to 129, but sadly the bow remains at 119. At least we tried. The perk is working and it does grant about 5% to pierce damage. Again, it's not a bad perk, but for 5% at level 14, I'm not getting too excited by it. The next perk at level 16 is the second crouching speed perk, Creeping Phantom 2. To continue the testing from earlier, we crouch walk a course that took 20 seconds without the perk, 15 seconds with the perk, and now with the level 2 perk, we see it takes only 11 seconds to finish. That's 9 seconds faster than no perk, which is 45% faster, not 35. I also tested regular walking speed, and surprisingly, it took 10 seconds to walk to the finish. So this perk is literally 5% slower to crouch walk than a regular walk. And for your reference, sprinting took 6 seconds. Both of these Creeping Phantom perks are incredible, and I can't recommend them enough. On to the final tier, the level 18 perks starting with Finesse II, which requires that we take Finesse I first and grants another 5% bonus to slashing damage. Looking at the stats of these two swords, we see an extra 7 and 5 damage after taking the perk, which is roughly a 5% increase. It's not a bad perk, assuming all the better perks before it were taken first. And for the final perk at level 18, Viper 2, which increases pierce damage by 5%. We do have to take Viper 1 to have access to this, but we see damage increasing by 7 and 5 after taking the perk, or about 5%. Again, it's not a bad perk, but it's a small bonus given how far into the perk tree we are at this point. Now that we know how all the perks work, let's rank them, starting with level 6, Deft Hands. Being able to use higher tier weapons sooner by lowering their agility stat requirements is huge, and on top of that, it's still useful in the late game, because your stamina usage per weapon is determined by the difference between the weapon's requirement and your current level. This is S tier all day long. Level 6 Featherweight reduces fall damage by more than its advertised value, which is always a nice surprise, but I must admit I can count on one hand how many times I've taken fall damage in my over 300 hours. If you're planning on trying parkour, just use the save your schnapps instead of using a whole perk as an insurance policy. This is C tier at best in my opinion. Up next, the level 8 perks, starting with Dominant Hand. This perk is great for any build using one-handed weapons without a shield. And if you've seen my strength perks guide, you'll know how bad using a shield is. While you do get a bonus to block stamina cost, the vast majority of the value from this perk is the extra 1 attack per stamina bar that you'll get. This is a solid A tier perk. The other level 8 perk, Nimble Stance, reduces stamina cost for dodging by a significant amount at 40%. While dodging is useful before level 8, it becomes so much stronger after taking this perk since we can avoid damage and still have enough stamina to get combos off on an enemy's flank. The only downside to dodging is it's not usable for a ranged only build, and it's not as effective when wearing heavy armor. But outside of these two scenarios, it's a great perk. I really want this to go into the S tier, but since I know a lot of people use heavy armor, I'm going to drop it down into A tier, but it moves in front at hand. The first level 10 perk is Deft Hands 2. Hopefully by now you know the power of these perks. More attacks per stamina bar, using better weapons sooner, etc. We don't need to mess around here. This goes up at the top, S tier. The other level 10 perk is Ranger Run, and before running all these tests, I thought this perk was S tier. However, now I understand how it actually works. It's not quite as good. It doesn't help you run further when you're sprinting, but helps you regain stamina quickly after you're done running. Generally, this is useful for combat, but the fact that you have to run for 10 seconds to activate it means you're either running in circles to get the perk to activate, or you're just not going to use it at all. I'm sure there are other good uses, so I don't want to be too harsh here. It's a B tier perk for me. At level 12, Creeping Phantom was already high up on my list for S tier perks, but after all the testing, it deserves even more. This perk speeds up your movement speed when sneaking around, which is incredibly important for stealth. But this perk doesn't increase your movement speed by only 15%, but more like 25%, which is incredible. This is an easy S tier in my books. Level 12 Totentanz increases our attack damage by 15% when we execute a perfect dodge, which is a massive boost. Considering half the damage perks in this tree only give 5%, I'm a huge fan of this perk. And if we combine it with Nimble Stance, it makes dodging even more appealing. I'm going to follow the same rankings as I did with Nimble Stance and put it in the A tier, but it probably belongs at the front at least. Moving on to level 14, let's start with Finesse I, which increases slash damage by 5%. You'll never see me poo-poo on free damage, especially when it's permanent without needing to do anything extra for it. The problem is, at level 14, I would hope for a bit more impact. It's a solid perk that belongs in B tier. Definitely pick it up after you get everything from S and A tier first. The other level 14 perk Viper one is in the same boat, but affects pierce damage and gives you 5% more. It's not a bad perk, but should be taken later after the better perks are picked up. This is B tier with Finesse I. There's only one perk at level 16 and it's Creeping Phantom 2. This perk suffers from the same problem as Creeping Phantom 1. We can only pick it once. Once you take this perk, your crouching movement speed is nearly identical to your normal walking speed. It's insane. This is S tier for sure. The level 18 perks are repeats of the level 14 perks, so we won't waste time going over them. Finesse 2 and Viper 2 give you an extra 5% to your damage. It's nothing special and they both belong in B tier. Looking at the full tier list, we've got 7 perks in the S and A tier, which is solid. Since we get our first perk at level 6, and we get 1 for every 2 levels, we'll need to be at level 18 agility before we pick up the most important ones. I'm pleasantly surprised with how good the agility perks are, and getting the best ones in before level 20 is always a good feeling. While these perks don't offer a ton of damage per attack, the boost to stamina is likely more important as it can not only dish out damage, but also keep you alive. Which perks surprised you the most from the testing? I was caught off guard by how mediocre Ranger Run was compared to how highly I rated it before. I also feel bad for not putting Totentanz and Nimble Stance in S tier, but we would have run out of room, so for the sake of cleanliness and keeping my OCD in check, it'll have to do for now. If you want to see more perk testing and ranking videos, click the playlist on screen now. A huge shout out to the YouTube members and Patreon supporters who help keep the channel moving forward. They get early access to all our videos, special emojis in chat, and so much more, so consider joining. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.